Have you ever said something in anger and regretted it moments later? Or felt overwhelmed by someone's words or actions, reacting before you even had time to think? In a world filled with noise, pressure, and emotional triggers, reacting feels automatic. But Carl Jung believed there's a better way, a deeper way. When you train your mind to respond, not react, you reclaim your power. You begin to live from presence, not panic, awareness, not impulse. This isn't about becoming emotionless. It's about becoming conscious. In this video, we'll take a powerful journey through Jungian psychology to uncover the roots of reaction and how to rise above it. If you've ever wanted to break free from emotional chaos and live with grounded clarity, this might just be the most important video you'll ever watch. In our daily lives, we often assume that we are in control of our choices, our emotions, and our responses. But Carl Jung's work reveals something unsettling yet powerful. Much of what we call choice is merely habit. Repetition, automatic behavior driven by parts of ourselves we've never fully examined. These reactions aren't really about the situation in front of us. They are echoes from the past, subtle, unconscious responses shaped by experiences we may no longer even remember. Think about a time when someone said something small, maybe even insignificant, and you suddenly snapped. Or when you felt paralyzed by anxiety over something that logically didn't warrant that level of fear. Most people chalk it up to stress or mood. But Jung would have asked, what part of you felt threatened? What emotion tried to rise to the surface? And why did you feel the need to suppress or unleash it? That overreaction, whether it came as anger, withdrawal, guilt, or panic, didn't emerge from the rational mind. It came from somewhere deeper. Jung believed that many of our emotional outbursts are not reflections of who we are in the present, but rather who we were at the moment our psyche was wounded. Each of us carries unresolved pain, unmet needs, and repressed memories. These fragments of the psyche form what Jung called the complex's small, unconscious splinters of identity that, when triggered, take over our thinking, feeling, and behavior. When you feel like a completely different person during a fight, or say something you later regret, it's not just that you lost your temper, it's that something buried inside you took over. Something you haven't yet brought into the light. This is what makes emotional reactions so dangerous. They feel personal, justified, and immediate, but they are often illusions. They feel like truth in the moment, but afterward, we're left wondering, why did I do that? Why did I say that? Jung's answer would be simple: because you haven't made that part of yourself conscious yet. In modern life, we've been trained to move fast, to make quick decisions, scroll endlessly, work under pressure, and respond instantly. In this speed, we've lost the ability to pause, to reflect, to question what's really driving us. We assume that reacting quickly means we're strong, decisive, or confident, but more often, it means we're disconnected from ourselves. It's in this awareness that we begin the real work, the work of asking ourselves deeper questions. What am I really feeling right now? Is this emotion truly about the present moment or something older, more vulnerable, trying to speak? This is not easy. It requires humility. It requires presence. But it is the only path to transformation. And here's the most hopeful truth: you are not broken because you react. You are human. Reactions are part of how we survived emotionally, especially when we were younger. But surviving and living are not the same. If you want to move from reaction to response, from survival to true living, you must begin to observe your emotional habits without judgment. You must become a witness to your own inner world. Jung would say, until you bring the unconscious into the light, it will rule your life and you will call it fate. Every reactive outburst, every emotional shutdown, every moment you feel hijacked by your feelings is not just something to suppress or fix. It is a message, a teacher, a chance to understand yourself more deeply. So the next time you feel overwhelmed or triggered, pause, not to avoid or deny your emotions, but to meet them, to understand where they come from. Because only when we see the trap clearly can we begin to free ourselves from it. And when that happens, when you no longer react from your wounds, but respond from your wholeness, you don't just change your mood. You change your life. Once you've caught a glimpse of your automatic reactions, those outbursts or shutdowns that seem to take control without warning, the next question becomes why. Why do certain situations ignite such strong emotions? Why does a single word, a facial expression, or someone else's silence leave you spiraling? Carl Jung answered this through one of his most profound and challenging concepts, the shadow. The shadow isn't some mystical darkness lurking outside of us. It's within us, shaped by every moment we rejected, denied, or suppressed a part of ourselves. It's the part of you that got scolded for being too loud, too angry, too sensitive, or too emotional. A part that was told to behave, to smile, to fit in. Over time, those parts of the self, often powerful and true, got pushed into hiding. But here's the thing, the shadow doesn't disappear just because we stop acknowledging it. It lives on, hidden but active, and it finds its way out through the cracks in our reactions. The more you push your anger away, the more it controls you. The more you deny your jealousy, the more you project it onto others. The more you suppress sadness, the more easily it erupts at the wrong time, toward the wrong person. Jung said, one does not become enlightened and by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. To grow, to evolve, to gain control over your mind, you must turn inward and meet your shadow with honesty. This is where most people stop, because facing the shadow is uncomfortable. It means confronting your flaws, your wounds, and your unmet needs. It means acknowledging that some of the pain you blame others for might be your own unresolved grief. It means seeing how often we use others as mirrors, reacting not to them, but to something they unknowingly reflect within us. And yet, this work is not about self-blame. It's about self-ownership. When you begin to explore your shadow, you no longer have to fear your own emotions. You stop seeing anger or sadness as threats. You start seeing them as guides. And slowly, you reclaim the parts of yourself that you've abandoned. The irony is that the parts of us we're most afraid of, our anger, our neediness, our intensity, are often the sources of our greatest strength when integrated. Anger becomes boundaries. Sensitivity becomes empathy. Darkness becomes depth. But only when we stop running from it. If you constantly feel triggered, it may not be the world that needs to change, it may be your shadow that's begging to be seen. If every disagreement turns into a meltdown, maybe it's not just the other person. Maybe it's an old version of yourself, still stuck in survival mode, still trying to be heard, still waiting for you to come home. So how do we begin this process? We start by noticing. When someone bothers you, ask why. What quality in them irritates you, and could that quality exist, even faintly, within you? When you overreact, ask what need wasn't met. What wound did that moment touch? This isn't easy work, but it is sacred. Because when you meet your shadow with compassion, something incredible happens. You become whole. No longer divided against yourself. No longer ashamed of who you are. Just real, human, awake. And with that awakening, your reactions soften. Not because you've become numb, but because you've become self-aware. You're no longer swinging at shadows, you're integrating them. And in that process, you begin to respond from your full self, not the frightened child within, but the conscious adult you are becoming. That is the power of facing your shadow. Not to shame yourself, but to free yourself. There's a moment, a fraction of a second, that exists between what happens to us and how we respond. Most of us never notice it. It's so brief that it slips through our awareness. But in that tiny space lives between a life lived in reaction and a life lived in intention. Carl Jung understood the power of that space. He believed that when we learn to pause, to step into that sliver of awareness, we take our first real step towards psychological freedom. So many of us are living on autopilot. We scroll, we speak, we argue, They reply all without really thinking. The world moves fast, and we're conditioned to move with it. But the faster we move, the more disconnected we become from ourselves, from others, and from the deeper meaning behind our emotions. Reactivity thrives in speed. Insight grows in stillness. When something provokes you, whether it's an insult, a rejection, or just a moment of stress, your body reacts instantly. Your heart races, your thoughts narrow, your breathing shortens. This is your nervous system leaping to your defense. It doesn't ask if a threat is real or imagined. It only knows that something feels dangerous. But not all danger is physical. Some of the most intense reactions come not from the outside world, but from old emotional wounds being touched. And unless we pause, we miss the opportunity to understand what's really happening. A pause is not just silence. It is awareness. It is choosing to sit, even briefly, with discomfort without judgment, without escape. When you pause, you open a door into your own consciousness. You begin to observe your thoughts instead of becoming them. You start to feel your emotions without letting them drive your behavior. That awareness creates space, and in space, there is freedom. It might be one breath, one heartbeat, one moment of saying, "Wait, let me feel this before I speak." In that moment, the entire direction of a conversation, a decision, even your day can change. Instead of reacting out of fear, you respond from understanding. Instead of attacking, you inquire. Instead of shutting down, you stay present. Carl Jung often emphasized the importance of consciousness. He said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." The pause is how we begin to make the unconscious conscious. It's how we begin to hear what the reaction was trying to say before it erupted. Maybe your anger is covering fear. Maybe your sadness is asking for rest. Maybe your anxiety is pointing to a boundary you've been afraid to set. This isn't about becoming emotionless. It's about becoming emotionally wise. And wisdom begins with presence. The more you practice pausing, the more you realize how many choices you actually have. You don't have to yell back. You don't have to spiral into self-doubt. You don't have to abandon yourself to please someone else. You can pause, you can breathe, and you can choose differently. Over time, this becomes a habit not of repression, but of reflection. You begin to trust yourself more. You become someone who is slow to react, but quick to understand. You become less shaken by chaos because you've found your anchor within. And here's the quiet truth, that pause isn't empty. It's full of clarity, full of strength, full of power, because in that space, you are no longer a puppet pulled by old strings. You are present, you are free, you are becoming whole. And you begin to pause, as Carl Jung so deeply encouraged. Something subtle but profound begins to happen. You no longer feel like life is simply happening to you. You begin to realize you are part of what happens next. In that sacred pause, a question arises not, "What should I do?" but "Who do I want to be in this moment?" This is the beginning of response. The conscious choice. The act of becoming an author of your own behavior, rather than a character in someone else's story. Most people don't live this way. Most people live by reaction, repeating the same emotional loops day after day, year after year. They argue the same way, break down the same way, apologize the same way, never realizing they are caught in a psychological script written long ago, often in childhood, often by pain. But when you learn to respond instead of react, you start editing that script. You start rewriting your part. And it's not always dramatic. Sometimes it's as simple as not interrupting someone during an argument. Sometimes it's holding your breath for 1 second longer before replying to a text that hurt you. Sometimes it's not replying at all. Not because you're passive, but because you've grown past the need to always defend, to always win, to always prove. Carl Jung believed that true maturity was not the absence of emotion, but the conscious integration of it. In other words, you don't stop feeling angry, you just stop letting anger drive the car. You learn to feel it to understand it, and then decide, deliberately, what to do with it. This is where your power lies. To respond is to reclaim authorship. It means you are no longer letting wounds speak for you. You are no longer letting fear hijack your relationships or your decisions. You are speaking from the self that is present, not the self that is afraid. And this shift changes everything. You begin to see conflict differently, not as something to be avoided or dominated, but as a mirror. What is this moment showing me about myself? What fear, insecurity, or unmet need is being touched? What old story is playing out, and do I still believe it? You stop needing to be right. Instead, you become curious about yourself, about the other person, about what else might be true. And in that curiosity, relationships start to feel less like battles and more like conversations. You stop bleeding from old wounds and calling it love. This transformation doesn't happen overnight. It's a muscle, a practice. Some days, you'll still react, you'll lose your cool, you'll say something you regret. That's part of the journey, but the difference is, now you notice it. And that noticing that one moment of awareness means everything. Because awareness is what builds the bridge between reaction and response. Jung's work reminds us that the unconscious will continue to control us until we become conscious of it. Every time you choose to respond instead of react, you are bringing a piece of that unconscious into the light. You are turning a pattern into a choice. You are evolving. And the result? Peace. Not the peace of never being challenged, but the peace of knowing that you can meet the challenge without losing yourself. You don't have to match someone's chaos with your own. You don't have to explain your worth to people determined to misunderstand you. You don't have to react to every trigger. You can respond calmly, clearly, powerfully. You become a steady presence in your own life, a presence that others begin to feel. Not because you're louder, but because you're deeper. Not because you're always right, but because you're always rooted. And that's the gift of response. It doesn't just change how others see you, it changes how you see yourself. Awareness is the beginning but not the end. You pause, you reflect, you choose to respond. And yet, something deeper still calls you forward. Because even with all your growth, there are moments when your inner world feels split, like you are made of many selves. Some calm and wise, others chaotic and wounded. Carl Jung believed this fragmentation was not a flaw, but the nature of the human psyche. And the goal is not to destroy those parts, but to integrate them, to bring them into harmony, to become whole. To integrate the self is to recognize that you are not one thing. You are not only the confident one or the insecure one, the kind one or the angry one. You are all of it. And when you deny certain parts of yourself, they do not disappear, they act out in secret. They sabotage your relationships, distort your choices, and rise up when you least expect it. The only way to transform them is to meet them, to listen, to bring them into the light with compassion. Jung called this process individuation, not to become more like others, but to become more yourself. Not the mask you were to please the world, not the role you were trained to play, but the real, honest, complex you, rooted in truth, not performance. And it is a painful, beautiful journey. Because to integrate the self means to accept parts you were once ashamed of. It means to say, yes, I have been afraid. I have been jealous. I have been small. But I see it now, and I choose to grow from it, not hide from it. When you begin to integrate, you no longer divide your emotions into good and bad. You start to see that your rage is trying to protect something tender, that your numbness is trying to avoid old pain, that your control is rooted in past chaos. You stop seeing yourself as broken and start seeing yourself as layered, alive, in progress. This inner wholeness changes everything, because the more you accept within, the less you seek validation without. You stop chasing approval, applause, or perfection. You begin to trust your inner voice, to stand grounded in who you are even if others don't understand it. Relationships change too. You no longer need people to complete you. You invite them to walk beside you not as saviors, but as mirrors. You stop expecting others to carry your wounds, and instead bring your healing to the table. You become a partner, not a projection. And in this wholeness, you experience a kind of peace you never imagined. Not the peace of no conflict, but the peace of no longer being at war with yourself. Jung taught that we all carry a personal and a collective unconscious, meaning your healing doesn't stop with you. When you become whole, you help heal something in the world too. You create space for others to feel safe, to be real, to begin their own inner work. Integration is not about perfection. It's about honesty, presence, courage. It's the daily practice of being who you are, not who you were told to be. And with every step toward wholeness, you reclaim your power, not the loud, performative power of ego, but the quiet, steady power of authenticity. This is how awareness becomes transformation, by not just understanding yourself, but embracing yourself. In the end, that is what Jung wanted for each of us. Not to live as fragments, reacting and pretending, but to live as whole beings, aware, integrated, and alive. After awareness comes integration. After integration comes stillness. But not the stillness most people imagine. This isn't silence born from suppression or withdrawal. This is a deeper stillness, one that lives at the core of an integrated self. It's the stillness that emerges not because the world is quiet, but because you are no longer thrown around by it. And Carl Jung knew this stillness is not weakness. It's strength, real strength, the kind that cannot be faked or forced. We live in a world obsessed with noise, constant movement, endless opinions, urgency masquerading as importance. We're taught that to be seen, we must speak loudly; to be valued, we must produce; to matter, we must hustle. But Jung understood something radical. Stillness is not a retreat from life, it is a return to the source of life within us. A return to center, a homecoming to the self. Stillness doesn't mean doing nothing. It means doing things from a different place. A deeper place. You still act, speak, and move, but no longer from panic, ego, or reaction. You move from presence, from clarity, from choice. When you're still within, people feel it. You don't have to prove your point. Your energy says enough. You don't chase love, success, or attention. You attract what's aligned. You don't erupt at every insult or flinch at every discomfort. You observe. You breathe, you decide, and most importantly, you stop abandoning yourself. Because in stillness, you can finally hear yourself again. The voice beneath the noise, the self beneath the self-image. You begin to feel what's real and what's illusion. What's true for you, not just what's trending. This is how peace becomes power, not by removing yourself from the world, but by learning to be in the world without being owned by it. Stillness gives you access to discernment. You don't say yes out of fear of being disliked. You don't say no just to be defiant. You say what is true for you. You move with intention, not impulse. You choose presence over panic. And in doing so, you gain something most people spend their entire lives chasing: inner clarity. This doesn't mean you become cold or detached. In fact, it's the opposite. Stillness softens you. It opens your heart, but not in a way that leaves you defenseless, in a way that makes you wise. You can hold space for someone's pain without taking it on. You can disagree without dehumanizing. You can be compassionate without losing your boundaries. And the beauty is this stillness, this inner peace. It's available to you right now. Not after you fix everything, not after you become perfect, but here in this moment, as you are. All it requires is a willingness to pause, to listen, to feel, and to trust the voice that rises from within. Jung would say that stillness is where we meet the self, the capital self, the whole and eternal part of us that isn't swayed by the chaos of the moment. It's the self that watches without judgment, that knows we're not here to win or dominate, but to evolve, to awaken, to become more fully who we already are. And when you start living from that space, not all the time, not perfectly, but consistently something powerful happens. You become steady, centered, quietly magnetic, the kind of person others feel safe around. Not because you have all the answers, but because you're not afraid of the questions. Stillness isn't the end of your journey, it's the foundation beneath it. It's the inner ground that allows you to rise, to act, to speak not from fear, but from wisdom, not from reaction, but from response. And in a world addicted to noise, the person who is still, who listens, reflects and speaks with purpose, that person becomes a light. Not because they shine the brightest, but because they burn from the inside out. Pain is not the enemy. Emotion is not the problem. And yet, so many of us are taught to fear our feelings, to suppress anger, hide sadness, and numb grief. We treat discomfort like a disease and run from the parts of ourselves that feel too heavy to carry. But Carl Jung believed that our emotions, especially the painful ones, are not flaws, they are messengers. And when met with awareness, they become fuel for transformation. This is emotional alchemy, not in the mystical sense, but in the deeply human sense. The process of taking something raw, chaotic, and overwhelming and turning it into something meaningful, into insight, into depth, into strength. Because here's the truth: every emotion carries energy. When ignored, that energy festers. It hardens into resentment, anxiety, and emotional numbness. But when acknowledged and held gently, without judgment, that energy moves. It transforms. And so do we. Take anger. Most people either explode with it or deny it altogether. But Jung saw anger as a signal pointing toward injustice, boundary violations, or buried hurt. When we explore it, not as something to fear, but as something to understand, we find its roots. Often, those roots stretch back into childhood, into moments we weren't allowed to speak, to say no, to cry. When you give anger a voice, it stops screaming. When you give it space, it reveals its wisdom. Sadness is the same. Beneath its weight is longing for connection, for lost innocence, for something real. Grief, too, is not weakness, it is proof that we've loved, that something mattered. When we allow ourselves to grieve fully, we open ourselves to joy fully. Jung believed that wholeness comes not from denying the dark, but from embracing it with light. And then there's fear, often misunderstood as a wall. But fear, when examined, can become a doorway. It tells you where you feel unsafe, where your inner child still needs protection, where you're growing beyond your comfort zone. Fear isn't the end of the path, it's the beginning of transformation. To feel deeply is not a liability. It is your superpower. Emotion, especially the raw and messy kind, is the gateway to authenticity. Because when you allow yourself to feel, you become real. You shed the performance, the perfection, and return to the truth of who you are: human, whole, awake. And there is power in that, real power. The kind that doesn't come from control, but from connection. You begin to realize that your emotions are not here to sabotage you, they're here to guide you. Every breakdown carries the seed of a breakthrough. Every low point is a doorway to a deeper self. This emotional alchemy takes time. It requires patience, presence, and a willingness to sit in discomfort without rushing to fix it. But in that sitting, in that stillness, transformation begins. You start to see that what once overwhelmed you is now a teacher, that what once scared you is now a source of strength. Jung often spoke of the process of individuation as a journey into the depths of the soul. Not a straight line, but a spiral. Again and again, we descend into ourselves, not to get stuck, but to integrate, to rise with more awareness than before. This is the heart of alchemy, the ability to face your pain without losing yourself, to hold emotion with both hands and say, I see you, you are part of me, but you are not all of me. And in doing so, you free yourself not by avoiding your feelings, but by walking through them. Because once you stop fearing emotion, you stop fearing yourself, you stop shrinking, pretending, or performing. You begin to live from truth. And people can feel that. They sense your depth, your groundedness. That's the alchemy Jung believed in. Not a magic trick, but a transformation of consciousness. A turning of shadow into strength. Pain into purpose. Emotion into evolution. And that power is already within you, waiting not to be conquered, but to be heard. There comes a point on the path when light alone isn't enough. Awareness grows. Peace expands. You begin to respond instead of react. But beneath the progress, something waits, something older, darker unspoken, and it won't stay hidden forever. This is the shadow, not evil, but exiled. Not broken, but buried. Carl Jung said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." The shadow is that unconscious. It's the parts of you you've been taught to ignore. It's your anger that was called rude. Your tears that were labeled weak. Your sensitivity, your rage, your desires, all the pieces that didn't fit the mask you learned to wear. So you pushed them down, hid them. But they didn't disappear. They sank into the shadow, waiting, not to harm you but to be seen. The shadow shows up in the ways you sabotage yourself, in the people you judge harshly, in the triggers you can't explain. It leaks through sarcasm, addictions, perfectionism, procrastination. It hides behind smiles, achievements, and even spirituality. And the longer it stays hidden, the more power it has. But here's the paradox: the shadow isn't bad. It's honest. It carries your rot root, the feelings you weren't safe to express, the parts of you that felt unlovable. And when you have the courage to meet it, not with fear but with compassion, something powerful happens, healing begins. To embrace the shadow is not to indulge it, but to integrate it. To say, "You are part of me. I see you now." It's not easy. It asks you to confront your own judgments, to question your old narratives. But it's the only way to become whole. Most people reject the shadow because they think healing is about becoming better. But Jung knew that true healing is about becoming real. It's not about light washing away darkness, it's about light making darkness visible. And once it's visible, it's no longer in control. You are. When you face your shadow, you gain back your lost energy. The energy it took to hide, pretend, and control. You become more alive, more honest, more human, and something even deeper begins to unfold: self-love. Not the surface level, affirmation kind, but the kind that looks into your own darkness and says, "Even this I do not abandon." This changes how you relate to others too. You stop projecting, stop blaming. You recognize your own patterns in the people who trigger you. You learn to hold space for their shadow, because you've learned it to hold space for your own. Relationships deepen, not because they're perfect, but because they're more honest. And maybe for the first time, you stop trying to be good and start trying to be true. You become less reactive, more reflective. Less self-righteous, more self-aware. You see how much of your pain wasn't your fault, but now it's your responsibility, not to carry it forever, but to meet it, learn from it, and transform it. Jung taught that the shadow holds not only our wounds but our greatest potential. Hidden in the darkness are the traits you once disowned: your boldness, your creativity, your sensuality, your voice. When you reclaim them, you don't just heal, you expand. And so, shadow work becomes a sacred task. Not a one-time event, but a lifelong practice. A mirror you return to again and again, not to judge, but to remember. Remember who you are beneath the mask. Remember what you had to forget in order to survive. And remember that healing is not about erasing the past, but reclaiming the parts of yourself you left behind. In the end, the shadow does not destroy you. Ignoring it does. Meeting it, that's what saves you. Because the person who has faced their own darkness walks through the world differently. Not afraid of pain, not addicted to pretending, but grounded, open, and free. And that's when real transformation begins. You began this journey with a simple idea that maybe life could be more than reaction. more than survival. That maybe there was a deeper way to live, to feel, to know yourself. Along the way, you discovered the traps of distraction, the noise of the world, and the masks we were just to be accepted. You explored awareness, emotional alchemy, the strength of stillness, and the deep, often uncomfortable truth of your shadow. And in doing so, you didn't just gain insight, you gained yourself. Carl Jung never promised comfort. He promised transformation. And real transformation asks everything of you: your honesty, your humility, your courage to go where most never dare. But what you receive in return is priceless inner freedom. A life no longer run by wounds or fear. A heart that no longer abandons itself. A mind that knows peace. A soul that feels whole. And maybe that's the greatest power of all, not to fix yourself, but to finally know yourself. So, if this video resonated with you, take a breath and ask yourself, what part of me did I meet today that I've been avoiding? What truth did I feel that I've been denying? This is your sign to keep going. Not to become someone else, but to become more you. If you found meaning here, I invite you to like, subscribe, and share this with someone who needs it. Because healing isn't a solo journey, it's a ripple. And your ripple might change someone's world.